Hi, everyone. My name is Renee Willis, and welcome to today's Tenant Talk. I'm with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and we're really excited to have you here with us for this special edition. As you know, Tenant Talk Live provides opportunities for residents to connect with the coalition and to connect with one another, to share best practices, and to learn how to be more involved in influencing federal housing policies, and to share stories, because I think it's important for us all to share what's happening in our communities and to learn from one another. So we will be recording this call today, and as always, we will send out the slides and the recording after the presentation. So let's go ahead and get started on our special edition, our special topic for today, which is race, housing, and hope. And as you know, over the last several months, we've been reminded that policies and laws that create and perpetuate poverty and racial inequity are written into the fabric of our country. We've seen this with COVID-19 because it has laid bare the systemic inequalities and inequities and structural racism that many communities experience daily. And especially after the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Rayshard Brooks, we've had more sustained and wide-ranging public attention to matters of race. So we wanted to create this space here today to talk to you about race, housing, and hope. So on today's call, we have our special guest, Vanessa German, who's an artist based in Pittsburgh. We have Rashida Philips, who is an attorney, an artist in Philadelphia. And then we'll also hear from the coalition's Kyle Arbuckle, who will provide important policy and field updates. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll open it up, at the end of each presentation, we'll open it up to Q&A. So first, let me introduce our first guest, the wonderful Vanessa German, who is a Pittsburgh-based artist and community activist who creates works that explore the power of transformation and healing. Her work is held in numerous permanent collections and has been featured in NPR, the New York Times, Oprah magazine, and other leading outlets. Vanessa uses her art to address hate in the world while expressing hope for the future. And so last week, Vanessa and I had an opportunity to chat briefly about this presentation, and she asked me if she was the first artist to be on Tenant Talk Live, and I told her yes, absolutely, but definitely not the last. So Vanessa, the floor is yours, and thank you so very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone in your world, wherever you are. I am wishing you well. I'm wishing you and sending my heart of peace and love out to you and your families for your dimensional wellness, for your intellectual, political, spiritual, and whole human being wellness. I am really honored to be here to be in space and time with you, because it is, for me, every opportunity that I have to connect with other human beings, with other Black people, with other people of color, through the issues that we contend with, the issues that oppress and constrain our humanity. When I have the opportunity to connect in spaces through that with love, it's really an opportunity that I get to be the most alive that I can be, which is what we're here on the planet to be. And in the introduction, Renee said that I'm a community activist, and what I, what I experience when I hear that is a sort of truth that I didn't voluntarily step into. I have no other option with my life, my time, my money, my body, or my creativity other than to actively press ferociously and courageously against every obstacle that tries to hinder and constrain my humanity. If human beings are 99.9% genetically identical, and the longest continually running truth of all time is that we are all here on the planet Earth together, then I must insist with every breath in my body that that truth be the central engine to our humanity, and it's not. So by dint of the fact that my body and my being is in this system that it is, I am an activist, and so much more than an activist. I'm a poet, and I'm a sculptor, I'm a photographer, and all of my work centers and is experienced through my lens as a Black, queer human being on a land called America. So I'm creating figures that are power figures that are embodied with the powers that I experience human beings taking up, almost like superheroes, to trigger, to push, to impress change upon the environments that we live in. So I create power figures, and I create installations and rituals for human beings to participate in relationship to their community, their neighborhood, and certain issues that allow all sorts of people, whether you're an artist or not an artist, to participate in really the work of inhabiting your entire citizenship. So my work looks like sculptures in a museum, but it also looks like rituals of dance and song and prayer throughout streets and communities. Most recently, I'm going to share some images with you of these of work that I just did in Omaha, Nebraska, which is where it's what they call one of the largest race riots in American history. It was the 100th year anniversary of the lynching of Will Brown. And so when I say I'm creating work that is of a ritual that human beings can participate in, that activate on top of ideas of protest and civil disobedience, and enter into community space the reality that we move with such incredible power as human beings, and our connection to our imaginations, our bodies, and the land that we're on. We have so much power to influence change. So I'm going to share some images with you of a body of work that I have called Sometimes We Cannot Be With Our Bodies, that was created in honor and memory of all of the Black trans women that have been killed across the nation for the last 10 years, in addition to honoring and holding the full lives and human citizenship of other Black and Brown and Indigenous bodies that have been stomped on and stomped to death and lynched by and through slow lynching and fast lynching, through the state police incarceration. So I'm going to share some images of that work with you, and then show you some images of what the community ritual on the street in neighborhoods look like. So are you able, Renee, are you able to see that image?
Yes, I can see it.
So inside of this installation, the installation's called Sometimes We Cannot Be With Our Bodies, because it speaks to how much secret technology Black and Brown people have to use to be present in their body in a system of crushing oppression. And so these figures, you can see that they're ornate, and they're ornate, and they are, I'm going to show you some more. I'm not able to scroll through them, but they're really heavily adorned with lots of colors and lots of different kinds of objects, because one of the things that I celebrate as an artist is I celebrate the power of creativity that we have. So here is another image of what you see there, and it's difficult to see from this angle, is a bicycle, and there's actually a figure on the ground in front of the bicycle. There are no heads or faces in this installation, but there are mirrors where you can see your face, and you can see the faces of other people in the space reflected to you. And I'm using a lot of color and birds and flowers to really have a space that celebrates the lives of human beings. And so this installation includes a soundtrack called the Sometimes We Cannot Be With Our Bodies radio show. And the radio show includes the voices of Tamir Rice's mother and Trayvon Martin's mother, and sort of Venus Extravaganza's, the voice of Angie Extravaganza. Venus Extravaganza was a trans woman who was killed in New York. She's featured in the movie Paris is Burning, and you hear Angie Extravaganza speaking to her love, and you hear Tamir Rice's parents speaking, Tamir Rice's mother speaking to how much she loved her child inside of this space where this body of work is. All the images I showed you are one body of work. And inside the space, I invite people to sing and to dance. And the music is all of those voiceovers of the parents and friends and loved ones of people we lost who are saying, my person was so much more than the media ever shared about them. Like Trayvon Martin's mother says how handsome her son was and how he smelled great and people loved him. And it is people expressing expressing love and expressing the wholeness of the humanity of the person that they love, which is stolen in the time in the way that they were killed and in how the media treats their deaths. And one of the things that I'm thinking about as an artist is how do we grieve as a community? How do we create spaces where we do not have to lock inside of our hearts and our souls? We do not have to lock inside of us the terrible grief that we feel having to watch Black death while America shrugs as it. What are we going to do with this incredible weight of heartbreak on our bodies and our souls? And so one of the works that, one of the ways that my work takes up presence in neighborhoods and inside of people's lives is through this aspect of social healing. So the last images I'm going to show you are of what that sense of ritual looks like. So this is us moving through the streets of Omaha, Nebraska. We're actually following the route that the mob dragged Will Brown's body towards the courthouse where he was lynched and set on fire. And we reclaim this path through neighborhoods in Omaha. We reclaim it with dance, we reclaim it with song, we reclaim it with prayer, and we also include the names and songs for other human beings who have been taken, whose lives have been taken and stolen. So we wove throughout this entire community in Omaha, and we end up at the courthouse. It still has bullet holes in it to this day from where the mob actually shot into the courthouse, into the jail to get Will Brown out, and then basically perform an hours-long torture and murder of this man. And so we reclaim the space for grief, we reclaim the space for joy, and we do it publicly, and we invite other people. People come out of their homes and they watch and they join in us and everything. And we're wearing that color blue on purpose. It is historically is a color that's related to healing and to the power of the ocean in certain cultures. And in the way that I hold the space for this color blue is that it is a gift. This color is a gift, and it's a gift that will become a vehicle of transformation and healing. So I'm an activist, I'm a sculptor, I'm a performer, and the center of my work and the center of my life and the engine of the work is love. And it was a matter of life and death for me to figure out that I could actually live my life by love and not live my life centered in this idea of capitalist materialistic material accumulation and success. I had to decide at the cliff of life and death that the center of my life was love, which I find in this time of activism, in this moment, that people are talking about love and how much more love we need and how Black people need to love each other more without really giving, without always giving substance and vulnerable substance and language and heart to what that loving is. And that loving for me is sharing. So when I finally, for a long time in my neighborhood in Homewood, and Homewood is one of the last Blackest neighborhoods in Pittsburgh, in my neighborhood, I was just squatting in a row house. I lived without running water. I collected water out of a Home Depot bucket off the gutter of my bathroom porch because the landlord had abandoned the property. And I just lived there under conditions that I think were really shocking for my friends, and they were shocking for my family, that I was creating art in a basement that was filled with black mold, and people had to come and say, this is not good for you, but it's what I had. And after I sold a couple pieces that I made in this damp, moldy basement, a collector from New York bought several works that I made forged from materials from abandoned houses and vacant lots, and that I assemblaged together in sculptures. They went to New York. And after that, I bought a house, and I never thought I would be able to buy a house. I bought a house for $3,500, and I did all the work on the house by bartering materials and bartering sculptures for materials. And one of the questions that I get the most in my neighborhood, because people see me a single, queer, Black woman, and unfortunately in my neighborhood, the most homophobia I've ever experienced in America has been in my neighborhood from other Black people. But one of the things they ask me so much is, how did you do that? How did you get the money to buy a house? Because after I bought one house, I bought two houses right next to each other, and one of them I just made an art house. So whenever that house, whenever the front door of that house is open, anybody can come into the house. The house is filled with art supplies, it's filled with books, and anybody can come in and you can make art. There is a stage in the backyard where we produce our own shows. We do writing projects, and we produce our own show, so I don't have to pay anybody else for a venue. And we have a large vegetable and flower garden that anybody has access to when the door is open. And it was, so what I tell people about being an artist and having had enough money to actually buy a house is that I realized at some point that, one, I could do whatever I want to do, that the world was going to try to tell me otherwise a lot, but I could do whatever I want to do. And I could do it by a system of my own creation. So I could extricate my needs from a system that was manipulative and corrosive to my humanity, and I could create my own system. And I tell people that, and I can see in their eyes how frightened they are to, how scary it seems to them to let go of a system and to create their own system. But so the last thing that I will offer is a short poem about my mom. And then I just thank you again for the time and the space. So this is a short poem about my mom raising me. I'm a self-taught artist. I have a high school diploma. I have no other paper, but this is how my mom taught me. My mother was the first real thug that I knew. She drew and grew a slew of ruthless and wild-winged weapons from the swell of her hips. She raised us up and she aimed our faces to the stars. My mom said, see, there you are, shining back at yourself from a billion brilliant light years away. Isn't it amazing? You came all of this way to stand and live in the light of your own shine. So don't believe people when they tell you that the very best that you can do and be with your life is money and pretty. Don't believe them when they tell you that the very best that you can do with your life and breath is an attempt to be cuter than the rest of the girls or desperate enough to die trying for it, because those are lies. The truth is, there is an entire universe of ideas alive inside of you right now, and they're spinning on the axis of your breath, so rise up and let them out. Here is how you can live your life. My mom said, be creative and be brave. That way you'll always have guts and good ideas with which to make changes. Be creative and be brave. That's a way to live a life. I thank you for the time.
That was amazing, 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 Vanessa. Thank you for sharing that with us. Wow, it takes my breath away. But yeah, that was food for the soul. So I really do appreciate that. And hopefully that in your poem and your story will lift up others who are on this call as well. Kyle, do we have any questions for Vanessa?
I don't see any right now, but I just put in the chat box, letting everybody know if you have any questions, just put them in the Q&A box at the bottom. There's a button on the bottom of your screen, so feel free. You can also raise your hand, and I can allow you to talk if you'd like to do that as well.
Fantastic. And while you all are thinking about the questions to ask, And I guess, Vanessa, one question that just popped into my mind is because you mentioned that you open the doors to the community to come into the art house.
Yes.
That's amazing. Do you have people from the community also volunteering or providing the art for the art house as well?
Oh, to me, because the art house is filled with the art that basically it's like filled with the art that kids make, and they want me to put it on the wall. So I'm going to show you some pictures of what that looks like. I want to if it comes, but here, let me see if it shows up. Oh, that's interesting. So you said volunteers. So the way that it works is that mostly I'm at the art house, an assistant is at the art house, and kids who have been coming to the art house for years will be there. So there'll be this wide age range of young people at the house, and we help each other. Sometimes one of my friends will be there who knits or who does a certain kind of art making. And what happens is they'll just sit and they'll do what they're doing, and kids come in and they say, what are you doing? What are you working on? And they'll say, I'm knitting, and they'll learn they'll learn sort of at the same level as the person who's just sitting in there with them. So there really is no hierarchy in the art house it's not a school. It's like everybody in the neighborhood has an open studio if they want it. And I will show you sort of what it looks like sometimes when people are in the house making. Just give me a sec.
Take your time.
I won't take all of the time, but I'm trying to.
You have one comment.
The house, I'll show you. This is what the house looks like. And inside of this, you can see, can you see it?
Oh my goodness, yes.
So that is the house. And the way that it worked is that that red bench in the front that used to not be there, it was a patch of grass, and there's a bus stop in front of the house, and there was no place for people to sit down. So I took out the grass, and when I say I took out the grass, there are always these boys in the neighborhood who were like, Miss Vanessa, you got any work we can do? And so they dug out the dirt. My contractor brought in the gravel. They leveled the gravel. My contractor, who's Mr. Jeff, who just lives up the street, he laid the concrete. I asked somebody on my Facebook page, hey, who wants to donate a red bench to the front of the art house? And the mother of a young woman who was killed when she was young, who loved art, reached out and said, could we donate this bench in my daughter Tessa's name? And I said yes. And so we actually included her daughter's name on the mosaic of the art house. And so that's what, and also one of the things that's fun about just the idea of like volunteers is whoever waited at the bus stop would also work on the mosaic. They would wait at the bus stop and they'd be like, what you doing? I'd be like, we making a mosaic. They're like, can I help? And I'd be like, it's so easy. Yes, you can help. And your children can help. And to this day, people are so proud of the little bit that they did on that mosaic. They will bring their grandkids to the house and they'd be like, baby, grandma made that E.
Oh, that's amazing.
Our house, that was grandma's E. And so it's the kind of space that, and then also the stars on the sides of the art, because listen, I don't have all the money in the world to be doing stuff. So what I did was I needed to finish the roof. I needed to finish work on the house. And so I offered to make, wait, here, I'll show you what it looks like in the art house. This is what sometimes. So do you see how there's stuff all over the walls? Do you see how?
Yeah, I love it.
How the one wall says, welcome to the art house, you are loved. What can you do here? You can take a walk in the garden. And so all the kids see the artwork that exists on the walls, and it's really inspiring to them. So they just want to put more artwork on the walls. And that person, the white person in that picture, teaches at the Creative and Performing Arts School of Pittsburgh Public Schools. Her name is Kaylin Horgan, and she's a choreographer and a dancer. So when she comes to the art house, we end every art house session with a dance party. I'll just ask a couple of whoever's birthday is closest to that day gets to choose a song that they want to hear, and we'll play the song and the kids just go crazy and dance. But when Kaylin is there, and they know that she's a choreographer, they know that she's a professional dancer, that she travels around the world, and she watches them dance and she says, you're really good at that. You have talent, you have skill. Then the kids start to look at themselves differently. They start to consider the possibility of what a creative life could be in a way that's serious. And the same thing happens whenever my friends who are photographers come by, whenever people are at the house who look at them and who look at their artwork and who say, this moves me, this touches me. And so I find that it's like the secret soulful activism of just keeping a center engine of love and a center engine of care and inviting people into that. And even, I will have to say, even when there's like conflict in the art house, and when, you know, some of the kids, just like when they're having a day, when they're having a moment, I used to sort of take a kid aside and be like, hey, it's going to be okay. You know, everything is going to be all right. But what I do now is I ask the kids to take care of each other. I'll say, hey, it looks like Keisha is having a hard day. Do you think you could, you know, can you give them a hug, or can you help them? And what I found is by doing that, like giving kids the sort of open space to care for each other, they really take on, it's like they have this necessity to love. And one kid will be crying and they put their arm around them, and one person will be like, my mother says, it's good to cry. You get stuff out of you. It's okay. Here, I'll sit with you while you cry. And then the other kids will make them a card or make them something. It's like just giving permission for them to feel, because, you know, unfortunately and like horribly traumatically, 2 people have been killed outside of the art house. And me and a couple of the kids saw this murder. We had to go to court and like testify in this homicide trial. And when the kids would come back to the house and they'd be like, Miss Vanessa, this is the place where Mr. Jeff got killed. It's right here. And I would say, and they'd be like, we should do something on this space. Like, this space shouldn't just be regular on the street anymore. So we painted that stretch of sidewalk gold, because we knew this man and he was loved, and nothing in the world sort of reflected this other story that carried on after he was murdered. But the kids would want to talk about things, and their parents, I heard parents more than one time say, you're a kid, you don't have to talk about that, you don't have to think about that. But they would obsess about it, and they would come to the art house and they used to line up in front of me while I was painting. And while I would paint, they would tell me these stories, and they would wait very patiently in line. And somebody would get like a frustrated annoyed and would want to jump the line to tell their story. And the other kids would be like, you wait your turn. Everybody gets a turn to tell their stories. And what they were telling me stories about were, you know, like young Black girls feeling depressed, just feeling so sad. One girl told me, I saw her at the art house, like she was standing at the door and she was crying. And I said, why are you crying? What's going on? And she said, I said, did you have a hard day? And she said, Miss Vanessa, every day is a hard day. Mm-hmm. And I asked her what happened that day. And she said, the kids in school said I'm ugly and that I smell like Africa. And I said, what does that mean? You know, she was like, well, Africa is bad. Africa is this. I said, show me where Africa is on the globe. And I gave her a globe, and she pointed to Greenland. And I said, here's something you should know about Africa. I said, you know how like Beyonce sings, she got iced by the rock and she's like wearing the platinum and the diamonds. I said, all of that comes from Africa. Everything that shines comes from Africa. And a car drove by with heavy bass. And I said, oh, you hear the sound of that bass? You hear that drum? that comes from Africa.
Yes.
The lure, I was like, so I have these opportunities at like the sidewalk level and the soul level to be like loving and affirming in a way that is intimate, and it's creative, because we're also doing it while we're transforming materials. And kids come into the art house, but when the doors open, anybody can come in. Like guys come after they leave the VA. One guy would come and sit in a corner and he would just paint lions all the time. And he was really good at it. He was really good. And I think about what neighborhoods could look like if they really reflected what we know makes human beings whole, right? That's what I think. I'm like, we know what art does for the brain. We know what art does for the body. If there's a liquor store and a church on every corner, there could be an art house every 6 blocks, and it could be open 24 hours, and it could have Wi-Fi, it could have a reading room, it could have a couple showers where people could always shower, it could have a washer and dryer. There would definitely be the big farm, the big like urban farm in the back of it, because we have a huge garden in the back. People are like, that's not a garden, Vanessa, start calling it a farm, call it what it is. But that we actually, could have communities and neighborhoods that reflect even the science of human wellness. But I feel like we have to make that, and I'm not asking anybody's permission anymore. I'm just going to keep doing stuff. That's how I move it.
That's right. Absolutely. To get the job done. And we have some comments from Alice Nightingale, who says that was outstanding. And then from Cynthia Vivian, who said that your talk was so empowering. And absolutely it was, Vanessa. I really do thank you for being on this call today and sharing with us. I think the depth and the breadth of your love for your community is very, very evident. So thank you. Thank you for sharing with us.
Something about that.
Yes.
So I recognize that I'm a part of a human community. I recognize from the highest of the heights to the land that my feet step on, that this is my community, and that I'm right to be a citizen of the planet Earth, and I'm right to be a citizen of my neighborhood and just the block that I live on. And I believe in the power of the heart, and I believe in the space of power that rises when we open our hearts to hold our own selves in a kind of in like a planetary earthling wholeness. So I have love for my community. I have love for you. I have love for Rashida. And I'm tired of sort of denying and pretending like I don't have that love. Like I'm not supposed to love all these human beings. And that love looks like honoring and respecting your freedom and your liberty. And liberty is the soul's right to breathe. So thank you, Renee. I look forward to listening and hearing Rashida and Kyle.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you. And I think the words on your art house said it well, where it said, we are all here together. And we truly, truly are.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you, Vanessa.
Yes. Thank you.
Hey, Renee.
Yes.
Someone had their hand raised, Nada, and I don't know if they still had a question. I was going to allow them to talk to see. Nada, are you still on?
Hi, Nada. Can you hear us? Okay, we may not be able to. All right, so Nada, we're gonna move on to our next speaker, but hopefully we can get you on before the end of the call. If you have a question for Vanessa.
There was also another one, but if you
want
to
go ahead.
Back to it, it was
from definitely.
Brooke, actually. Vanessa, Brooke is one of our coworkers at the NLIHC, but
hi, Brooke.
She said, you talked about your installation and community engagement in Nebraska. This is so cool, from your work itself to all the various elements of how you engage others in it. Do you travel in your work often, or do you do most of your community activism based in Pittsburgh? How do you determine where to go when you do travel?
So when it's not a global pandemic, I'm on the road a lot. I can be in a different city every week, and I travel wherever the word travels because I'm a writer and a poet, and I do a lot of programming at institutions, at colleges and universities and community spaces. So I'm on the road a lot, and it's a lot of times it's determined by where my sculptures go. So it's not me deciding where to go. I will say that I have a reckoning with even the language community activism. I have a reckoning around the phrase social justice. I'm having reckoning around ideas of radicality, protest, and human citizenship. So it's like you said, where do you choose to do your activism? Is it on the road or is it here or there? So wherever I take my body, my breath, my mind, my imagination, I am going to be actively living the love, the courage, and living through sort of the vehicle of creativity and creative expression to tackle and confront any issue that would try to oppress me. So that's wherever I go. And that means like when that young Native woman, you know, three and a half years ago was in Standing Rock, North Dakota and said she had a dream and people should come to the land. I was like, oh, I can protest just by being on the land with you? Just my human body in that space with you on purpose as a protest, I'm coming. Drove 2,000 miles. I got to Bismarck, North Dakota, got to Standing Rock, was one of 3 Black faces. Native people were looking at me like, one sister said to me, she said, you look like you came a long way to be here. All this to say, that woke me up to ideas of dimensional protest. Like, where is my body? And is my body in resistance to these ideas and these spaces? So wherever I go, I am actively present as a full human citizen. And that looks like I'm a very tender person. I'm really loving. I keep thank you cards with me so that I can write the bus driver and say, thank you, you made my day today. And because one of the fiercest forms of activism that I can engage in is in the eye contact and is in each moment that I have with human beings who look like me, human beings who are adjacent, and having moments where I stand in affirmation of their whole humanity by how I am in conversation, by how I challenge in those conversations. Like when we were in North Dakota, I remember as a Black woman, I had more freedom to leave camp and go to Walmart. So I would go to Walmart all the time and I was buying baby food and I was buying diapers. And one time I took one of the Native women from camp with me, and the white woman at the register refused to put the money in the woman's hand. And she dropped it on the counter in front of her. And it happened. And sometimes I'm really like naive. And I was like, what's happening? Why'd the money drop? What's going on? And the Native woman looked at me very slowly. She goes, this is racism. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I get it. I had to sort of shift where I stood in what I thought racism looked like in certain places. All this to say that I had to come up with a phrase that I tell people when they have microaggressions that they think they're going to slide on, when they're activating their racism and oppression of some ordinary moment. And so that going to Standing Rock and seeing those little things taught me that I need a phrase to tell people. So when I see that happen, when I experience those microaggressions, I see them do it to somebody else, I will tell the person, I say, I see what you just did. And that is wrong. And it is wrong because we are all human beings together, and you owe that human being apology for your behavior, for treating them like that. And so I give myself this way that I'm not always shocked and surprised by moments of active, of the little microaggressions and the larger. So that's one of the ways that I choose to be, to confront in ordinary ways with my eye contact. And then I also do, I've definitely taken over a couple freeways before too.
I love it. And we have a comment from Mrs. Brown. Mrs. Brown is one of our board members. She's a resident board member at the coalition. And she says, Miss Vanessa, you are wonderful. The work you are doing is changing lives for our young people. God bless you and your village, Mrs. B.
Thanks, Mrs. B.
And she's out of New York.
Yo, New York.
So Kyle, do we have any other questions? I don't see any.
We have one
And
more. We have one more. I don't know if you want to move on or.
we have time, just one quick one.
Okay.
I'll let this be the last one.
From Lissa Mendez, she asked, Vanessa, can you give a detailed explanation for how you were able to barter for home ownership, how, who, etc.?
Yes, homie, yes. And so listen, right? I had been squatting in this house, but I was also working. So I was saving money while I was living in conditions that honestly, you know, my parents didn't know how I was living at the time. And didn't have a lot of food. One of my neighbors would feed me. She was the kind of woman who always had a pot of something on the stove, like those old Southern women. There's always a pot of beans or greens on the stove. And so what I did was I had saved money, and this was before gentrification started to push as heavily as it is pushing into my neighborhood in Pittsburgh. The amount of private DMs, private text messages that I get from developers and speculators is overwhelming. I will be on the road, Mexico, New York, and I have developers who want actually the art house and my studio because they're the last two houses standing on a block where everything else has been demolished. So before that started to happen, about now it's like 12 years ago, I saw a sign go up in a house. Oh no, I looked on Craigslist that an owner was selling a house, and I went and I met this woman, and she was selling a house for what was left on her mortgage. And after I met with her, I told her that I could pay cash for the house. She never called me. Then I saw a foreclosure sign in that front yard. I called the foreclosure company and I offered them, somebody gave me the advice to offer the company half of what they were asking for the house. They were asking $28,000 for the house. I offered $14,000. They took my offer. One of my friends was gonna help me. I didn't have $14,000. A friend was gonna help me with the cash, and he backed out because another friend of his said it wasn't a good thing to invest in me as a Black woman with no college degrees, who's an artist, to buy a house that I would fail to pay back this money but we know that that's not true. We know statistically, if you support and you invest in Black women, that investment is going to multiply itself. So, so I called the foreclosure company back, and I was honest. And I said, look, I don't have this money. I'm gonna make you another offer on this house. And I offered them $3,000 for the house. And the guy on the phone just didn't say anything. He was quiet. He said, I appreciate your honesty. And he goes, I'm gonna call you back. I'm gonna talk to my team. And he called me back, and they counter offered me to buy the house for $3,500. So I bought the house for $3,500. And what I did was, at the time, my sculptures, the price of my sculptures in collections in museums is more than all of my houses are worth. So I could not technically afford to buy my own work, right? So like, let's say, so I had collectors who were interested in my work as my career was taking off. And what I would say to them is, you can buy one of my sculptures if you take me to the flooring store and you buy all of the flooring for my entire house. Because they would basically then pay off a sculpture over time on their credit card, and I would have flooring. So I did it with flooring, paint, roofing, and I had a contractor in my neighborhood teach me how to do drywall. So I did the drywall myself, and I bartered for the materials of other things. And then I would find one person who knew how to do flooring, and I would ask that person what they needed to make. And I would tell them, like, this is the situation that I'm in. And so I would pay some cash, but the majority of the heavy lifting on the house came because people charge stuff. They would charge thousands of dollars worth of building materials, and I would give them the sculpture, and they would just, pay off their credit card bill over time. And so one of the things that I tell people who they're like, so I don't have sculptures to barter, one of the things I say is, what can you learn to do yourself, one, and who can you have a conversation with about meeting you where you are, right? And so if it's plumbing, like what other, if you don't have money, I say, like, what else is valuable? So like Miss Stephanie, who lives up the street from me, she's a great cook. And there would be times that she would just cook for me. And then I would be able to offer this, you know, I would be able to take care of the kids or something like that. But one of the things I say is, you know, and I feel like some of the work that I do is honestly just reminding people that they're powerful and reminding people that their ideas matter. And because I meet so many people who are depressed, I meet so many people who are just worn down by it. And so one of the things I come back and I say is, sometimes I just have to tell them the truth. I'd be like, you're so beautiful. No one can cook like you. I haven't seen it anywhere else before. Like, that's a powerful thing. Like, I know you've had horrible food before, so know that this is something that you can build on. I meet people who love to clean. I'm like, not everybody loves to clean. You could print a business card. You could do this. And I just have to, sometimes I feel like I'm doing monologues of people's own possibilities for them. I'm like, you could have one building. You could clean the offices in one building at the 6800 block of Frankstown Avenue, and that would carry you. You could do this. And so one of the things that I find is that I remind people often of their power, and I remind them of the power of how powerful their creativity is, and do a lot of conversating with people on the street and at the bus stop about how real their ideas are and how real possibility still is, because the depression and the weight of things it's impressive, but it's not nearly as impressive as the power inside of the individual is. And so I do a lot of seeing into people's own selves for themselves.
Thank you so much, so very much, Vanessa. We appreciate your words. And yes, we are so glad that you are our first artist because you brought a lot of light and a lot of energy and a lot of hope to the conversation. And you're very inspiring. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. Absolutely. So we're going to move on to our next presenter, Rashida Philips. Rashida is also from Pennsylvania. She's based out of Philadelphia. And Rashida is a housing attorney. She's a mother. She's an interdisciplinary artist. She's a cultural producer whose writing has appeared in the Villanova Law Review, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Temple Political and Civil Rights Journal, among others. She is the founder of the Afrofuturist Affair and a founding member of Metropolarity Queer Speculative Fiction Collective. She's also the co-founder of Black Quantum Futurism and co-creator of the award-winning Community Futures Lab. Rashida is also an artist, and she is part of her Black Quantum Futurism collective. She's exhibited and presented in the Institute, of Contemporary Art London, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Rashida is also a social justice advocate. She's formerly an attorney at the Shriver Center. Rashida is making a transition right now. She is moving back to Community Legal Services of Philadelphia. And when she was there in an earlier stint, Rashida led a right to counsel campaign, resulting in significant expansion of legal services for tenants. So we're super excited to have Rashida with us today, again, who is an attorney and a mother, as I said, and also our second artist here on Tenant Talk. So Rashida, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Vanessa, for your presentation. Longtime fan and follower of your work, and just so much of it is amazing and resonates, and so I thank you for sharing that. I'm going to share my screen if I can. Okay. So this is not going to follow a strict presentation. I kind of just wanted to have some visuals for you all to kind of look at, but I just generally want to talk about eviction and kind of the intersections happening around the pandemic and COVID, as well as racial justice and the racial uprisings that have been happening in relation to police brutality and murders and systemic oppression and everything that we are all dealing with and have been dealing with for a very long time. So just to kind of give the landscape in Philadelphia, this is pre-pandemic. You know, Philly is like a lot of other cities around the country, and where you're seeing Black women being the most impacted by evictions and other forms of housing instability. Philly, eviction is a leading cause of homelessness in Philadelphia. And we are a city that has been, you know, for the most part, a homeownership city. We've been known as a homeownership city, where over 65% previously of our city were homeowners. Now, because of the mortgage foreclosure crisis that happened in 2008, many other things that have happened along the way in terms of gentrification, things like that, our eviction rate is now 4 times higher than the foreclosure rate. We have tens of thousands of Philadelphians who are living in substandard housing conditions. We're an old city, so that means that we have a very old housing stock. And so we have primarily in our Black neighborhoods where there's concentrated poverty, we're seeing people who live in substandard housing, you know, kind of like the conditions that Vanessa was talking about, mold in the basements, things that trigger people's asthma, trigger health conditions, things like that. And so not only are Philadelphians being impacted by housing instability, we're being impacted by environmental, you know, hazards and things that are coming as a result of our housing conditions, which blows my mind all the time. One of the things that, you know, we talk about with evictions, and I'm sure you all kind of understand this and have this sense that typically we talk about people who are being evicted as being poor or people who have fallen behind on their rent. But when we looked at Philadelphia, the reasons why people end up in court, why people are being evicted, right? It's really the opposite. It's that they are thrust into situations where eviction only propels them into poverty and not necessarily the other way around. So they may not have been in poverty. They may have been, you know, maybe low wage workers or, you know, getting by to pay the rent every month, but one little thing puts them in, you know, a hole, and maybe they fall behind on rent. You know, for a short period of time. And we see this in Philadelphia when we look at the eviction records and show that people are being taken to rent for $50, right? For not paying a late fee 1 month, these kinds of things. So these kinds of situations put people into poverty, and not necessarily that people are in poverty and then they become evicted. And so that's some of the things that we also try to untangle when we're talking about this. And of course, we know that evictions harm children's academic achievement, their school attendance, all of these things, they negatively impact physical, mental health, etc. So this is pre-pandemic, right? Post-pandemic, right? Or not post, during, right? We know around the country that the people who are most impacted, who are being most impacted by COVID-19 are Black people, are Black communities. And there is certainly a linkage there, right? Of why people who are primarily known to, you know, be impacted by housing instability are facing the danger of COVID-19 and being impacted. And particularly when right, the refrain that we hear coming, right, is that your best way of preventing COVID is by having a home, is by being at home, right? That is the logic behind stay-at-home orders. It's the logic behind, you know, shutting things down. So if you have a city where most of the people facing housing instability are Black, where most of the people facing housing instability and being evicted are Black and Black women, where most of the essential workers are Black people, right? It is bound to happen. This is the result of all of these things. And so another thing to point out about housing discrimination in Philadelphia and what it looks like, and again, you can make these linkages here between why Black people are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. 2/3 of landlords in Philadelphia refuse subsidized housing vouchers. Most of the people who get housing vouchers, right, are Black women in a lot of situations. 70% of our annual eviction filings, 22,000 eviction filings, in a city that has a poverty rate of 26.75%. consistently, right? And we have 22,000 eviction filings. You know, again, concentrated poverty. And then other things that show that the impact of loss of affordable housing, gentrification, is directly impacting Black neighborhoods. So this is not like a myth. This is not anecdotal. This is like hardcore facts and information showing that we don't just have a poverty issue. We don't just have a housing instability issue. It is a race issue. It is a gender justice issue. It's all of these things wrapped in. And again, the people impacted by systemic racism through healthcare is Black people. And so, just making those linkages. Just to talk a little bit before I talk about some of the ways that Philadelphia is kind of addressing some of these issues, I want to talk about some of the ways that I, as a housing advocate, approach the work. Renee described a lot of the ways that I engage in some of my work. I'm an artist, I'm a mother, I'm an advocate. I'm also an Afrofuturist. I consider myself an Afrofuturist, and I bring that lens. It's not just an aesthetic or a science. If you've heard of the term, you might have heard of it in kind of relation to like Black Panther as a film, which is a great film, of course, but it's not the only representation of Afrofuturism. And so when I came into Afrofuturism as a artist and scholar and researcher, I was very much interested in thinking about how it applied to my work and how it applied to Black people experiencing housing inequality. And so I think about my work in terms of legal temporality and think about time-based solutions that help us to connect to these visions of the Afrofuture, and not just, thinking of the Afrofuture or thinking of Afrofuturism as something that's technology-based or, I enter it in terms of thinking about time and thinking about the ways that Black bodies have been locked out of time. And so that shows up in a number of ways in our court systems, of course. And there's many different ways in which eviction court and the times that are within eviction court do not interact very well with other courts and other systems that Black people are caught up in. And so, for example, in Philadelphia, the reason why you see so many people who are being evicted do what's called default on their evictions, where they're not showing up to eviction court, right, is one of those. We have a 55% default rate where 55% of people are not showing up to eviction court, which means they're automatically being evicted because they weren't able to come in and defend themselves. So that's an outstanding, outrageous number. Part of the reason why that number is the way that it is because we have one eviction court. That eviction court is located in Center City, Philadelphia, where almost none of the people who are being evicted live. And so when they're trying to get to court, which starts at 8:45 a.m. or 8:30 a.m. in some cases, if they don't show up at 8:45 on the dot, their name gets called, they're out in 30 days. And so, just thinking about the time-based kind of things that are happening in court. And the reason why people aren't making it to court is because they don't live in Center City. It takes 2 or 3 buses to get to Center City, right? If you are disabled, if you're not able-bodied and you have to take a certain kind of van, like that's going to take time for them to come pick you up. You have kids, you have to drop off to school at 8:30 when school was a thing, right? You're going to miss your name being called. So that's just one example of the ways that low-income people, Black people in particular, are sort of their time, right? When Maxine Waters talks about reclaiming our time, their time is compressed in these ways. We're cut off from our futures, right? Very literally, we're cut off from our futures. The number of Black people being murdered on the streets. We're cut off from our futures in terms of healthcare, in terms of the medical field. So the number of ways in which we're cut off from our futures, our time is compressed in these ways. We're cut off from our past in very particular ways. So that's just one example of how time shows up in these kinds of things and how we think through time-based solutions when we're working with people. We're thinking about the long-term future, the Afro-future, and again, how Black people in particular don't get access to those temporal spaces without interference from the state in some way. Some other ways that we've sort of tried to address systemic housing issues through both of race equity and a Black futurist lens. I started a space called Community Futures Lab in Philadelphia, which was in a part of North Philadelphia where they did a process called Eminent Domain on 1,300 properties in the area, where they just took them and said, hey, we have a good reason, which is that we're going to redevelop this neighborhood. And so through that process, they not only knocked down public housing units, which temporarily displaced over 500 families from that neighborhood over a 10-year long period. They also rebuilt $500,000 mixed income housing in that area. So that means that in the future, 10 years from now, right, you're going to have a number of people who are locked out of being able to return in that neighborhood merely because of the prices of the house and the taxes and things like that. And it's also going to raise the property tax on other people. The other thing that to say about Community Futures Lab is that part of the reason that we created that space was to be able to disrupt some of the narrative that was coming out from the city around why they were taking eminent domain, and that the residents' voices were being drowned out. And so a lot of the narrative that you hear about North Philly, and this is across, you know, you can be anywhere in the country and hear the term North Philly, and certain ideas pop up about what North Philly is. And anytime North Philly makes national media, it's for something very negative, right? But this is the overwhelming picture that comes out of this neighborhood. And so they ignore everything about it. They ignore the history. They ignore the disinvestment that the city itself made on this community for it to come like this. They ignore the race riot that happened in 1964 that happened because of police brutality in that same neighborhood, which it never recovered from. And so we started the Community Futures Lab as a way to kind of amplify those histories, those futures, the visions of the future for people who were in that neighborhood. And that was just one way that we used art to kind of like connect to these issues around housing inequality in the city. We'll highlight a couple other things. Using race discrimination as a way to also prevent evictions. And so one of the things that we were able to do in Philadelphia is that we saw a uptick in mass evictions happening. Like this is kind of right before the pandemic, we started to see a lot of mass evictions happening and whole buildings being emptied out of people. And so in one particular building, there were 200 people, and in less than 3 months, they said everybody has to go. And they said everybody with a Section 8 voucher actually gets less time to go, and they don't get their security deposit back. So all this stuff. And on their website, literally said, "Hey, we're redeveloping this apartment building so that it's accessible to young professionals trying to get downtown." So this is like prime real estate. They're admitting on their website that they're both being ageist, racist, all of these things. And so we were able to use a kind of little known provision in our fair housing rules that allowed us to do an injunction. And so I was able to file 20 something injunctions on the basis of race discrimination, disability discrimination, source of income discrimination for the voucher issue, and stop a lot of those evictions through that. And we worked very closely with community organizers who were able to represent the people that we as legal services couldn't represent either because they were high income or whatever the situation may be. And out of that came, not only were we able to help some of the residents preserve, you know, their tenancy for a little while longer. And, you know, even that is none of it was a good outcome at the end of the day. We were able to get some funding, some money out of the lawsuits and things like that. None of it was good, right? People are still extremely traumatized by this. Anyway, one of the other things that did come out of it in terms of a long-term solution is that as a direct result of this case, we were able to get just cause eviction legislation passed in Philadelphia. So that was kind of some of the long-term systemic solutions. Just want to talk a little bit about what has happened as a result of the pandemic. And so I want to connect these dots to say that what came out of this campaign around Right to Counsel, which happened last year and took place over 5 years, is that we were able to really raise the profile of racial justice and housing instability, and in such a way that that conversation has continued. And so you see city council people kind of carrying the mantle of this. And in their legislation that they introduce now, right, that is always a factor. They are always talking about the people most impacted being Black women. And so one of the things that came out of the pandemic is that we had a slate of legislation introduced, which was called the Emergency Housing Protection Act. And so those bills included rent stabilization for a period of time, an eviction moratorium, an eviction diversion program. These are things that we would never have gotten, like, you know, some of it, again, the conversation was moving forward. We got Right to Counsel, but things like a eviction diversion program was not kind of yet happening or viable. But through this legislation and through, again, the kind of impact of, I think also with some of the uprisings that were happening in Philadelphia, we were able to get that legislation passed. And so we now have this Emergency Housing Protection Act in place, which is amazing set of legislation. And it has its flaws. Like part of it requires you to prove that you were impacted by COVID-19. And that should not be the conversation, right? If we're talking about housing as a human right, if we're talking about housing as health, if we're talking about this is the way to prevent people from getting COVID-19, right? That should not be the framing of the conversation. But, you know, it is what it is when you have landlords who come in and they insert themselves. This is what you're going to get out of it. But it's still an amazing piece of legislation that came directly from the people and from the people most impacted by this. So just, I know I've been talking a lot and there may be questions. Want to give a brief overview of, like, again, how I think about this work and think about Afrofuturism as an advocacy tool and think about time and justice. And so thinking about approaching the work with a sense of temporal abundance versus temporal scarcity. And so often you hear when you're doing this kind of work, especially racial justice work, right? We don't have time to do this. We don't have time to prioritize this, especially in legal services. We have to get, you know, we have to help the person who's in front of us. We have to think about the eviction happening right now. But, you know, that's operating from a place where time feels scarce. And that is a very Western white supremacist way of thinking about time and the way that time engages with Black people and Black bodies. And so Afrofuturism has taught me about temporal abundance and that we can create time. Thinking about the quantumness of systemic oppression. You know, systemic oppression is not linear. You know, we can't always trace a clean line from the 1960s or even from slavery to this point in the present. It goes all over the place. So it's very quantum and things, you know, and I could talk hours about quantum physics and time, so I'm not going to do that. Thinking about inclusive and expansive future visioning. And so bringing that to our work, you know, again, making the time to bring about not just looking again at the person who's in front of us or the eviction that's in front of us, thinking about the whole system, thinking about what we want to see in the future, thinking about the future where housing as a human right is the priority, and so operating from that space and making sure that we're including disabled folks, making sure that we're including folks with mental health, you know, like not just operating from a space of privilege, and so that is something that I come to with my work, like understanding where my privilege is. When I'm working with communities, like I have to sit back and be like, hey, look, I have a full-time job, I have a house, I'm not worried right now about where I'm going to sleep the next day. So what am I bringing to this, and how can I use that privilege to help push this or take a step back when I need to, even, you know, and that was part of what happened with Community Futures Lab is like, you know, I live in the neighborhood where I started the lab, but I don't know everybody, you know, the neighborhood is not a monolith. Black people are not a monolith. The way that they feel about what's happening in their community is not monolithic, right? So taking the time also to come out and build relationships with people is really important. I talked a little bit about temporal conflicts, you know, familial time, personal time, communal time, all of those things, and the ways in which they operate together or the ways in which they right, are at odds, especially when it comes to court systems. Understanding of political and institutional time and how it operates in white supremacist culture, and then seeing the past and present and future as open possibilities. And just to talk a little bit about that, like one of the ways in which I think about that, right, is when we're thinking about things like criminal records, right, and who gets locked out of housing because of a criminal record. And so many times I've seen this, like I was telling you about these riots that happened in North Philly in 1964. We had a client who was sitting on her porch when the riots happened in 1964. She's now an elderly lady. She got arrested. She now cannot be admitted into senior housing as a result of that record. 50 years later, it's absolutely not. So thinking about, right, but when we think about solutions where we're able to open up the past and say, hey, that's actually ridiculous. The past is not locked, right? We can add more information in a way that right, impacts the future and impacts people's future possibilities. So seeing those things as open possibilities and not just as set. So these are just a couple of pictures of the Community Futures Lab that we had for a year. A lot of the things that we were thinking about is mapping, right? And who's the map maker and understanding the power of mapping. And so this is the neighborhood that was targeted for the eminent domain and gentrification that's happening. And so thinking about that and having people, you know, thinking about Google Maps, right? And while this eminent domain was happening, Google was actively updating its maps. And so the Black bodies and Black people that you see here, right, are no longer represented in these. I mean, first of all, the surveillance state of Google itself is highly problematic. But again, just, you know, the erasure of Black people and their housing and their communal memories, right? We have murals in Philadelphia, all over Philadelphia, that are being covered by luxury housing that represent our Black history, represent communal history, that are just being covered, and they're going to be wiped off of the Google map. And, you know, how are you ever going to know that they existed? So thinking about that, and so some of the things that we did in the Community Futures Lab was this kind of alternative mapping, you know, having people map out and mark places on the map in a neighborhood where they've experienced joy, where they've experienced happiness or even trauma, and having them, you know, think through that and unpack that and try to heal some of that stuff in terms of reclaiming their neighborhood and their communal memory. So these are a couple other photos. This is an art exhibition that we had with some community members, and this is a quilt that an artist named Betty Lee Craft, who's based in Philadelphia, amazing artist, works with textiles. She created this quilt of redlining maps in Philadelphia and photos from the archives around housing and things like that. And this is a website that I've developed as a part of the Community Futures Lab project. It's called futureslab.community. And so it is a, we call it a quantum time capsule or archive that is open source. Anybody can sign up and create a account, and you can add photos, recordings, things to the map, again, as a way to, and you can like kind of show where you see gentrification happening, all these things as a way to take back the power of being able to document the erasure that people are seeing happen in the community. So these are just some other photos, and yeah, I'll stop there.
That's incredible, Rashida. My goodness. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. There's a lot going on in Philadelphia, and you have your hands full, it looks like, but it's such important work that you're doing. So I really do appreciate you taking the time to share it with us and to share it with the community of residents who are on this call. Are there any questions for Rashida? Trying to see if we have any questions.
I had one, actually. It's Black Quantum Futurism, Rashida? Is that the name of the website?
Yes, my website, blackquantumfuturism.com, and you can see all the projects and everything on that through that website. Yes.
I'm going to share it in the chat so people can.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. And we have a comment from Sherry. It just moved on me, Horbacks. And I do apologize, Sherry, if I'm mispronouncing your name. But Sherry says that is amazing. Copy of PowerPoint recordings. Yes, we will definitely get you a copy of the recording. And Sherry says, you know, definitely that she wants to hear the info again. So good stuff there. And yeah, so Kyle, yeah, it looks like you did share the information for Rashida's website in the chat. And then we have a comment from Judy Davis, who says, your presentation today is just amazing. So thank you so much, Rashida, for all that you've shared, for all that you do, your work in Philadelphia and beyond. We really do appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
We do have one more, Renee.
Sure.
Lissa Mendez asked, have you seen a shift in attitudes towards using eminent domain to protect affordable housing and prevent gentrification? I see this as a vital procedure that guarantees land stays affordable, but I imagine there's a lot of pushback from free market housing proponents.
So in Philadelphia, I would say no, only because I haven't seen that shift in attitudes, only because that is not usually how it's framed. It's not usually framed as a thing that is going to protect affordable housing. It's usually framed or done in a way that increases gentrification in communities. I think if there was a conversation and an education and there was more engagement in the process with community, and I think that's a lot of what went wrong in a neighborhood where eminent domain did happen, is that the community was not engaged in a way that it needed to be, and was not informed in a way that it needed to be in order for that process to be something that people would see as beneficial. And so that was a lot of the issue there. So I think if it was done in a way where it was a completely community engaged process where they can, you know, where people understand the process of this, right? And also as a way to, there was more of a way for people to be able to push back and keep their properties, because also what happens in eminent domain, at least what happened in this neighborhood, is that a lot of low-income homeowners were pushed out of the neighborhood and had their properties taken through that eminent domain process. And so when you talk about time here, right, they got less than 6 months notice that their properties were being taken. And then the process to fight to get their property back is a 10-year long process, and it's money and it's time and it's all of these things. And so that does not leave a good taste in the mouth of a community around what the potential benefits of eminent domain could be. And then also recently with the pandemic, something really disgusting happened where this hospital in Philadelphia was bought by a developer and then turned into luxury housing. And then we didn't have enough hospital beds when the pandemic hit. And then the city decided that eminent domain would be too expensive and too long of a process to try to get that hospital back. So when you see those kinds of contradictions, you don't feel that eminent domain is a process that's going to work for a neighborhood, and it ends up again just increasing gentrification for people. But I hear what you're saying, and I think it should be in some situations put on the table as a solution where it's going to be viable and where it's not going to have a harmful impact on other community members, and where they have a place in the process to be able to do it in a way that is not going to destroy a neighborhood, because that's actually what this eminent domain did.
Awesome. And it looks like we have another comment from Sherry, who says, "I love the passion." Thank you, Rashida. And I think that's it. I don't think we have any other questions. And again, Rashida, thank you so very much for being with us and sharing your story and your work with us today on the call. All right, so we're gonna move into Kyle, if you can, because I know we're running a little bit late on time. So if you can just give a very brief update or field update, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. So yeah, real quick, we are still tracking the HEROES Act in Congress. That is the supplemental package that would provide several of NLIHC's priorities. So that would be rental assistance and eviction moratorium and emergency solutions grant money for homeless service providers. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat where you can contact your senators to have them support this legislation. It's very easy. You just fill out your name and your address, and we have a template for you. You can change it if you'd like, but please feel free to take advantage of that. And then the timeline for that right now, we're still looking late July. It's been delayed since it passed in May, but we're still waiting for the Senate to debate on the bill. So that gives us more time to garner more support. And some key states that we're looking at are Washington, Virginia, West Virginia, and Alabama. So if you live in those states, I would strongly encourage you to contact your senators. And then the other update I wanted to give is on the Tenant Talk print publication, which just came out. We had a special edition on COVID-19, edited by myself, but with contributions from my colleagues on the field team, where we just discussed how COVID-19 has impacted low-income tenants across the country and what's being done in certain places to counteract that, and also nationally what's been done to counteract it as well. So I will drop that in the chat as well. Feel free to check it out. And if you'd like a hard copy, please email me. I'll put my email in there as well, and we can get you one if you'd like. So I think that's it, Renee.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Kyle. And so yeah, certainly check out the chat because Rashida has also put some links to the websites that she referenced in her remarks. So also too, for additional information on COVID-19 and housing, go to our website at NLIHC.org. Go to the COVID-19 page, and you'll see links to it from the home page. And that's where you can find a lot of the resources on housing and COVID-19, also some fact sheets that may be helpful to you as well. As we mentioned earlier, we will share the recording with you today. So we'll get that out in the email. Our next Tenant Talk Live is scheduled for Monday, July the 6th at 6 o'clock. And we hope to continue the conversation around housing and race and equity. If you would like to be a speaker on an upcoming Tenant Talk Live, please do reach out to us. Or even if you have a topic that you would like us to cover, please do let us know. You can reach us at outreach@nlihc.org. Again, that's outreach@nlihc.org. And once again, I just want to give a thanks to our wonderful special guests, Rashida Philips and Vanessa German. Absolutely phenomenal. And thank you so very much for being with us today. And also to everyone on the call and who hopefully will be watching the recording, thank you for joining us. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Indeed.
Bye.
Thank you.